Before the video starts, it's important I let you know that this weekend, on Saturday, the 18th of May, the Blue Army podcast and the Last Ditch podcast will be going head-to-head in the Content Cup, being held over at Gretna's Raydell Park, for some very good causes in aid of Andy's Man Club and obviously Mind Mental Health Charity. It's on Saturday. £5 a ticket with a £1 booking fee. I hope to see you all there. Hello and welcome to Blue Army TV. I'm sitting here in the same position I was sitting here last year, here to talk about this season. This season in review. And look, to be honest with you, this video is maybe a little bit later than I would have wanted to put it out originally, and it's certainly a lot later than I put the video out last year to review last season. However, I think a lot of people would agree with me that I'm a little bit less excited to talk about this season as I was to talk about last season. We all know why, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But a disappointing season overall. I feel like last season, there were highs, there were lows. It was an exciting season, obviously ending with the ultimate high of being promoted at Wembley. And that's what most football seasons are. It's a combination of the highs, the lows. It's a real roller coaster of a game. But this year hasn't exactly been like that, with very limited highs. Off the pitch there's been their highs, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But on the pitch it's been a real low for pretty much the entire season, with no real massive let-ups, no real runs of form, no back-to-back wins at all, which we'll talk about. But starting off, I'll go into the first game of the season, a 1-1 draw against Fleetwood that ultimately... I think a lot of Carlisle fans managed to convince themselves that Fleetwood were a good team, which we obviously learned later on in this season that they weren't. And people were kind of happy with, look, our first game in League One in God knows how many years, and we managed to not get beat. We look up to it. We looked probably the better team that day against Fleetwood, and it was almost an encouraging first point. It put us in mid-table at that point in the season. I know it doesn't mean anything after one game, but we hadn't lost, which, you talk about the Carlisle curse, which I think Stephen Presley broke, where we'd lose... Not Stephen Presley, when... Anyways, it was broke, I think it was maybe Chris Beach, where we'd lost the opening day of the season for years and years, until fairly recently, and it was, we managed to get a draw in a new tough league, and it filled us with a lot of optimism. That was pretty quickly shot down by a 1-0 defeat to Harrogate in the League Cup. Harrogate being a league below us. Yes, the whole Harrogate curse thing was still a thing, but with League One players, or what we thought were League One quality players in the squad, we kind of expected to win this game quite comfortably. We got beat, knocked out of the League Cup in the early stages, and unfortunately that probably should have been a warning for things to come. Next was a 1-0 defeat away at Oxford, which I think Oxford were quite early on tipped for promotion, and we're top of the league by this point, and were for a while after this point as well. So, a 1-0 defeat to top of the league, which I'm sure there's a lot of 1-0 defeats against top of the league in this video, surprisingly. It didn't seem like the end of the world. It didn't seem like a massively awful result. I think we defended well in that game. We just couldn't find the goal, and we created chances. It was just the goal scoring that seemed to be the issue. Next on, we had a 1-1 draw at home to Wigan on a Tuesday night. It was the first Tuesday night kickoff of the game. I'm sure you heard that plane just go over there. It was quite loud. A 1-1 draw at Wigan. Wigan, although they were bottom of the league at this point, but that was because of their points deduction, and everyone kind of tipped them as quite a good team. They fell short of any kind of real playoff push this season, but a decent squad with some decent championship players, even some could argue. And it wasn't a bad result. We were still waiting for our first win, but and that wasn't coming anytime soon, as we got beat 2-0 by Exeter. We got beat 1-0 by Port Vale. Until we finally, at home, got our first victory against Shrewsbury. I remember Terry Ablade. God, he seems to have disappeared. Just, he had a really good game when he came on off the bench. Joe Garner securing the 3 points at the end in the last minute. And then a 2-2 draw at high-flying Stevenage, and it looked like we were getting things back together. A 1-1 draw at Lincoln meant we went 3 games unbeaten, which we didn't replicate at any point in the season after that. And yeah, then things kind of fell off a bit. It was 2-0 loss to Derby, 2-0 loss to Wickham, a 1-1 draw at Peterborough, and then the very famous 3-1 away victory at Bolton Wanderers. You know, a game that they'll obviously come to regret, having just missed out on automatic promotion places. Yeah, it was a weird day. Jordan Gibson, who finished the season as the club's top goal scorer in the end, managed to bag himself a hat-trick. And it was a real high point in the season, and this was around the time when the Piatek interest started to become a bit more concrete. I remember them putting something on Twitter after this, on the Castle Sports Group Twitter account. That was followed up by a 1-0 defeat to Leyton Orient, a 1-0 defeat to Portsmouth, a 2-1 win at Burton. You know, 2 wins in our last 4 games at that point. You know, we were dropping towards the relegation zone, but there was a real kind of sentiment that things weren't over, that we weren't really in that much danger. But following on from that, a 1-0 defeat to Cambridge, a 3-1 defeat to Leyton Orient to knock us out in the first round of the FA Cup. That meant we were out in the first round of the FA Cup, the League Cup, and later the Papa John's, or whatever you want to call it these days, or the Bristol Street Motors Cup. You know, we were out at the first time of asking in all 3 of those competitions. A 1-0 defeat to Bristol Rovers, and then a 1-1 draw at Charlton, which marked the start of the new ownership group. But unfortunately, that 1-1 draw seemed to be the only thing positive after that, as right after that, we got beat 5-1 by, at the time, in the relegation zone, Reading, followed by a 3-0 battering by Blackpool in what was probably the worst away game I've ever been to. Not in terms of the stadium, but in terms of the result, it was just flat. I don't think we ever got out our own half. We looked absolutely awful that game. A 2-2 draw at Northampton, which, you know, we kind of scraped at. In the end, a 1-0 home defeat to bottom of the league Cheltenham was a real blow for us in a game that we expected to win. A 1-1 away draw at Fleetwood followed that. You know, and to be honest, the 4 games, Northampton, Cheltenham, Fleetwood and Wigan, who were all relegation threatened at the time, or at that point in the season, and not to get a single win out of any of them was really frustrating. I'll go on and talk about the 2-0 defeat to Wigan. Them 4 games were very difficult to take, because I think that's almost when I thought, nah, I think we'll go down here. That's when it was kind of put into my mind, this is what's going to happen. This is, you know, we're cemented in that fight at the very least. I think we were second off bottom at the time, with Cheltenham still being bottom. It was honestly a very, very tough one to take. Gabriel Breeze made his debut in the Fleetwood game, did well at Wigan as well, and then we won 2-1 at home to Port Vale in a game that was very even. Port Vale at the time was slipping down the table, weren't in the relegation zone yet, but it was a real marker of things to come from them. They were really on a massive slump, and I don't think they'd won in the last 10 games before that game. And that continued at Carlisle after they got beat. We lost 2-1 to Exeter, we lost 3-1 to Oxford, 2-1 to Barnsley, 4-1 to Bolton, 3-2 to Leyton Orient, 1-0 to Portsmouth, 4-0 to Cambridge, 2-1 to Bristol Rovers, which you know, I'm starting to sense a theme here, followed by a kind of scrappy 1-0 win at Burton Albion. Harry Lewis's first and only clean sheet for the club. A 3-1 defeat to Reading, a 3-2 game that we lost at Barnsley, we lost 1-0 to Shrewsbury, 2-2 at Stevenage. We beat Peterborough in the second time this season where a player of ours has scored a hat-trick in a 3-1 win, this time being John Mellish, who was playing in whatever position he so desired at the time. 3 unreal goals as well. I think he did really well, John Mellish. But, you know, these wins, they're very isolated, as you'll notice, and this was followed by a 3-1 defeat to Lincoln, a 2-0 defeat to Northampton, a 1-0 win at Cheltenham, which kept us alive a bit, 1-0 defeat to Blackpool, 3-1 defeat to Wickham, and a 2-0 defeat to Derby County. Yeah, it was a you know, we didn't win many games, and that'll come to be seen in the stats. As I'll say, we obviously played the 46 games that every team does, with 7 wins, 9 draws, and 30 losses, ending us on 30 points in 24th position with a goal difference of -40, with 41 goals being scored and 81 goals being conceded, and that's the thing that sent us down, that 81 conceded. Goals scored, 41. It's poor, but it's not. If you were to have a league table of just goals scored, we wouldn't be in the relegation zone. It's not. And yes, the strikers were a big problem for us all season, but 81 conceded is by far the worst in the division. And I think a lot of that came from the uncertainty in the goalkeeping department. Obviously, we bring in Harry Lewis in January. He is first choice at one point in the season. We started with Thomas Hawley first choice. Anderson was until he got injured. Gabriel Breeze was for a few games. And I just think chopping and changing the goalkeeper, and I said at the time when we started to change it about, it's never ever going to end well, and it didn't. It creates that uncertainty with the goalkeeper in the back line. And I don't think any of them... Gabriel Breeze, I think, was protected a lot by the defence, because I think, well, as they should have been, I think Gabriel Breeze was probably the highest performer in those four, but with the shortest amount of games to judge it off. Anderson being the worst, also with a kind of very limited frame of reference. Thomas Hawley was poor at the start of the season, and Harry Lewis was poor when he came in January. But talking about the January, I'll go on to the signings we made then. That being Harry Lewis, as I've mentioned, Sean Green, Josh Vila, Harrison Neal, Georgie Kelly, and Luke Armstrong for a club record fee. Georgie Kelly not actually playing a game for us until we were already relegated. And Luke Armstrong finishing the season on 3 goals. I don't think it was either their fault really that we went down, but yeah, I've got all of the results written down in front of me. That's what I'm reading from, and it makes for quite poor reading, and it's quite hard to reflect on this because it's a very poor season that there isn't really many positives to take from it. Maybe the Bolton and Peterborough games where we've obviously turned up and we've beat decent teams away from home. Decent promotion chasing teams as well, with both of them teams playing, finishing in the playoffs. Bolton at the very top of them playoff places. But yeah, it's 30 losses in a season is a lot to take, and that's not including cup games either, which we lost our fair share of as well. But yeah, it's a season that's seen us go down. It's seen us have many positives off the pitch. With just before the Northampton game kicking off, we found out that we were getting taken over by the Piatex, who I'm sure will be long-term a very good thing for the club. But look, I think you've just got to look at the squad we started the season with was nowhere near good enough. And I agree with Paul Simpson, and it's a quote from him that stuck with me, that we started this season with a worse squad than we ended last season with, and that was always going to be a problem, especially goal scoring, because if you look at some of these early results, Fleetwood, Harrogate, Oxford, Wigan, Port Vale, it was very, very rare we got beat by more than one goal in them early stages of the season. We very, very rarely conceded more than one. It was just that we couldn't score. And then, I think after you lose so many games, heads drop, and when heads dropped, we started conceding a bit more. But I almost feel like the defence this season, starting off, I thought was fine. Obviously, Sam Lavelle came into a lot of criticism towards the end of the season, but at the start of the year, I don't think he was doing anything really badly wrong. It was just when we got into that run of losing games, and I think January almost came a little bit too late. When we got into that run of losing games, it's hard to get out of that, and we just slumped and got worse and worse, and we needed the summer. We needed a break. We needed, the summer transfer window. We needed League One to be over. We needed this season to be over for hopefully to go again next year. I don't think the January signings, any of them, are particularly bad. Sean Green's obviously came in on loan, didn't really make an appearance, and is now gone. But the rest of them, you look at Vila, Neal, Armstrong, Kelly, I think are all good signings. Harry Lewis, for me, had a bad end to the season, but I still think he can be a decent enough signing. Certainly on paper, last season's, well, the season before this, Harry Lewis was League 2 Goalkeeper of the Year. So on paper, going into League 2 now, we've got a goalkeeper there that's won, a Player of the Season in that position. Luke Armstrong, obviously a decent enough League 2 striker. Georgie Kelly, he's showed his quality this season despite not getting a goal. Vila and Neal, I think, are both brilliant midfielders. Their additions in this season just came a bit too late when we were already in a slump of losing every single game. But yeah, I think player of the season, you've got to give it to John Mellish. I think, not just his hat trick, but I think he's been the most consistent player, and he's definitely one that never gave up right till the very end, as is always the case with him. But a couple of days after the season finished, we announced our retained release list, which led to the, releasing of Josh Emmanuel, top goal scorer Jordan Gibson, Thomas Hawley, Paul Huntington, Max Kilsby, Sean Maguire, Kai Nugent, and Corey Whelan. Which is every single player that was out of contract got released, pretty much. The reason there wasn't more on that list is because a lot of players were on 2 or 3 year deals, which at the time we all thought was brilliant, but I'm sure there's a few more players this season that are going to leave. They're the players that are officially gone, and you've got to think, on that list there's some big hitters. We've got club captain Paul Huntington on that list, and we've got top goal scorer Jordan Gibson, not to mention Golden Glove winner last season in League 2, Thomas Hawley, leaving. There's some big names in that list, and I'm sure it won't be out of the club for long, but I think the time at Carlisle had come to an end. Thomas Hawley had lost his number 1 spot, and I think it hurt me to see him go, because him at the end of the season, it's really sad to see him go, and he will be remembered very fondly, but I think his time was probably up. Paul Huntington, I think, probably could have done a job in League 2, but, I think him and Paul Simpson, I'm not sure, were clicking like they did last season. And Jordan Gibson, I thought his attitude was a bit, it left a lot to be desired, and it's not really one I'm complaining too much about him leaving at the end of the season. But yeah, it's a season to forget. I'm sorry that you've had to watch this and relive this season, because it's not something I want to do either. But yeah, thank you for watching. Hopefully next season can be better in a year's time. I'm sitting here talking about a title win or something, or at the very least another playoff win. Let's do it again. But yeah, thank you for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and in a bit.